So I will call this meeting to order of the South Bend Empowerment Zone at 6:11 p.m. on January 16th. And I just had my agenda up. First item on the agenda is roll call. And I'll just do a roll call of visually who I see here on the Zoom call. So Karima Fowler, Ryan Mathis, Wilson, myself,
Present.
Jeff Ray, I think, right, is that our who else? And Sonya's on the call as I've been looking at the list here. So other board members not mentioned are absent. We have sufficient board members for quorum. I'm doing this part since Rosa, our secretary, is not able to be here tonight. First day at Ivy Tech, so she's teaching. Okay, the first order of the on the first item on our agenda is adoption of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion related to the agenda.
I move we adopt the agenda.
I second.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ryan. Any conversation? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Next item on the agenda, is there any opposition?
Nay.
And then next item on the agenda is approval of the December board meeting minutes. I'll entertain a motion related to our board meeting minutes.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dwayne. Any conversation? Move to vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Is there any opposition? All right. Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Next up on the agenda is the board president report. And then before we jump into that, I do want to do a couple of just housekeeping items for the meeting. One, to let everybody know, so from our digital platform here, you can choose who you see on your screen. If you click on the three dots on your screen, you can change layout and see your preferred settings. Reminder to board members, we need to be visible on cam when we take votes. I also will, during public comment, I'll read a little more of a public comment on directions and how we'll do that in terms of using the question and answer chat. Normally, we don't take virtual public comment, but we will today since the entire meeting is being done virtually. And with that, I think the first item on the board president report, I will hand over to Dr. Lewis to talk about the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day activities and a reflection yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to the board members, as well as staff, parents, and students, as well as guests. As we know, yesterday was Dr. Martin Luther King Day, and here in South Bend, we celebrated that via the annual breakfast and subsequent festivities. It was great to see many community members there, including some of our own board members. Coming up, we will have a Black History Month celebration event, and that event is already being publicized. But as I did last year for Black History Month, I want to highlight this year, as it relates to Black History Month, another pivotal individual. I know oftentimes we talk about, some of the usual forebearers of the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, etc. But we have lots of heroes here in our own backyard. And so in the decades prior to the Civil War, free Black Hoosiers played an important role in leading enslaved people to freedom, frequently traveling into southern states to bring groups of slaves north. Chapman Harris became one of the most well-known Black Hoosiers to play a role in the Underground Railroad. A resident of Jefferson County, Indiana, Harris was a blacksmith and Baptist minister. He settled near Madison in 1839 and soon became a pilot on the Underground Railroad. When he or his sons planned trips across the Ohio River to bring back any fugitives waiting on the other side, Harris hammered an anvil to alert waiting slaves that help was on the way. Harris and his sons made many successful runs across the Ohio River, despite a few close calls. Following the Civil War, he became active in Republican politics and later died in 1890. So again, we often know the more notable names, but right here in Indiana, we have our own heroes who played an integral part, who are worthy of being celebrated in Black History Month. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And this is one of the few years that I missed the MLK breakfast celebration event here in South Bend. I was actually in Atlanta for the weekend, and it was great. We made a visit actually to MLK's memorial and site and all of that this weekend. So it was nice to get a chance to see that as well on this weekend. So one is a reminder to everybody too. Well, one, reading my list here, International Day of Education is January 24th. And so we'll have that celebration coming up. But I do want to highlight, as Dr. Lewis mentioned, the Black History Month Showcase. Last year was our first one at the Morris Performing Arts Center, and definitely was a fantastic event and one that I would put on your calendars for this year. So put that on your calendar as a great event, and there will be an evening performance, which I'm excited about this year. Last year was during the day, and exciting to be able to have a more public performance in the evening for everybody to celebrate. So please put that on your calendars. The other one for me, just general, Happy New Year to everybody. We're back. The kickstart of the school year here has been a little slowed with the weather. We hope everyone has been safe today and tomorrow with the school delay, and that everybody stays warm and is able to get to school safely tomorrow as we get the semester rolling here. All right, so that is the extent of my report. Next up on our agenda, we'll be going through our business services reports. And I think,
Yep,
so is
ready.
Rhonda going to kick us off. Thank you very much. Take it away, Rhonda.
All right, good evening. Good evening, board members and public. I will be presenting the business services update. So we'll start with the finance statement of activity for our 501c3. You'll see our revenue that came in for the month of December and our expenditures. Just a quick note, we have reviewed these financials with the finance committee of the board and also in executive session, as we do monthly. Moving along, you'll find our statement of financial position. You'll see our current assets of the 501c3 and our liabilities. Next slide. Here is our budget to actuals for just the 501c3. This is what we budgeted and where we are at this point in the year. You'll see some items are under budget and some over due to the circumstances of the year. All in all, we're about 63% into our budget and a little over half of the actual school year. So we're close to being on par to where we need to be, give or take. Moving along to the next slide. Here is an all funds update, not just the 501c3, but this is the revenue we expected from our grants, from the education fund, et cetera. This revenue was anticipated last year spring. There will be some updates as nearly a year has passed. So we do expect for our next board meeting, we will have some updated revenues. Some of these funds we're maybe getting more money, some may be less, so we can better calibrate the spend for the rest of the year. But based on these original numbers, we have expended approximately 53% of our budget, putting us on par. We're still very vigilant, however, and very watchful. So we're not resting on our laurels. We're watching over these numbers closely to make sure we are in balance. Okay. Are there any questions on the Finances, as noted, we have reviewed these, but I will definitely take any questions. If there are none, we can go to the next slide for our personnel update.
Rhonda, I do think, just as a procedure thing, the board needs to accept the financial report. So I'll move that we accept the financial reports as presented this evening.
I would second that.
Thank you, Ryan. Any additional comments or questions? Thank you for catching that, Jeff. And then here we would then enter before the board votes, we would take public comment here. And so I don't know if you've got a slide, Julia, you could pull that up for me to read, but I will talk about thank you. And then I will mention the digital directions to that, right? So to make a public comment, please submit it in the question and answer tool in Google Meets. In the lower right corner of your Google Meets window, click on the icon of a triangle, circle and square. And in that menu that appears, click Q&A. Please include your name and address with your question. At the appropriate time, you will be recognized by the board and may turn on your camera and microphone to ask your question. And then I'll read the public comment. The board will hold a public comment period before each vote and at the end of the meeting. It's requested that the public focus comments on the topic of the vote. It is requested that the public comment on all other topics be made at the end of the meeting. Individuals must sign on either online by 12 p.m. the meeting day or in person no later than 10 minutes after the call to order. We're making exclusion today, just accepting them here online. Individuals must make their comments in person at the board meeting. Individuals are invited to address the board for 3 minutes. Individuals may only speak once during a public comment period. Speakers shall properly identify themselves after they approach the podium by stating their name and address for the record, given instructions on how we'll do that digitally. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a person's statement if the statement becomes personally directed, abusive, or obscene. So at this point, we'll take public comment now related to the financial report. I'll wait a second in case there's a pop-up. And if not, if you're having trouble making it to and you can figure out making it, we can also take those comments at the end related to items that we're taking action on today. All right, so I'll call the question here. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, sorry.
I think I heard all of those. Any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes, and we'll continue moving on our reports. And next up, I think, is Rhonda again with personnel.
Yes, thank you. So our next slide, here's our personnel report. Here's the December hires for the zone. We have 12 staff here, broken down by their class, cert or non-cert, and their school. The next slide, you'll find the December departures. We have 2 departed from the zone and 1 retired, for a total of 3 departures from the zone in December. Moving to the next slide. This is our staffing timeline for the 24-25 school year. We are following the district closely to an extent, but the zone has interjected some items here. But please take a look at this at your convenience so you'll know where we're at on our staffing timeline. We've provided, with the help of Melanie Hackett, Executive Director of Talent Development here, our staffing timeline January through April. So please keep abreast of that, and we will be reporting out updates for this semester. If there are no questions, that includes the business services portion.
I'll make a comment and just say I love this robust plan on handling staffing. I know we're in a hard, challenging time around finding staff and keeping staff, and I appreciate the diligence that the office staff are going through to try to make sure that we're staffed up, not just currently, but also forecasting into next school year. So good job putting this together, and hopefully we're able to work this plan well and have us well positioned for next school year. Good work.
Thank you. And we are in a better position this year. We are 93% staffed. and our staff retention rate has improved greatly. Our preliminary numbers show we have retained over 90% of our staff.
It's great. Good work.
Thank you.
Next up, we don't need to do okay, so next up will be the focused reports, correct? Balance score.
Yeah.
Yep, balance scorecard. Perfect.
Yes.
Take it away, Julia.
Sure. So this, in October, we created the balance scorecard to give the annual assessment of the zone as an overall organization. So this will include both programs and student outcomes, as well as organizational infrastructure, such as finance and personnel. Because this is an annual assessment, what we're sharing tonight is more of a temperature check of where we are at the end of the first semester, which compares to the baseline of where we ended last year. So this will be the high level summary of some KPIs at this point in time, and then we'll go into specifics for a handful of indicators that we think will be of greatest interest to the board tonight. I'm going to go through the next few pages relatively quickly as you've seen them before, but just as a refresher or reorientation and from our last discussion about the scorecard. So as you'll recall, the scorecard is for a few different reasons. One, communication to various external audiences, the comprehensive assessment, and then also as a tool for us as a team to sort of assess our progress and adjust as necessary. So this is more of a number 3 in sharing with you where we are on that. Again, as you'll recall, the scorecard itself is divided into the 3 domain areas of leadership, learning, and resources. And within each of those domains, you'll see the subcategories, whether it's student leadership under leadership, iReady under learning, financial stewardship under resources. So the first slide here, again, should be relatively familiar. On the left-hand side, you'll see just a quick summary of the overall KPIs and what will be annual only and what we have to share with you tonight. So you can see that there's a total of 75 KPIs overall. Tonight, rolled up into the gauge charts on this page are 48, which are divided 12 in leadership, 24 in learning, and 12 in resources. Now, just to orient you to the gauge slides, although you've seen them before, what's a little bit different this time is that, one, they're only including that subset of mid-year KPIs that we have that data for. So it will be the out of 24 for learning. And what we're showing is the percentage of those KPIs that have already met or exceeded the baseline for last year, as opposed to the annual assessment where we'll be able to show whether or not we've achieved a particular target for that KPI. So in this case, as an example, in leadership, we're at about 67% that are at or beyond what the baseline was at the end of the last school year, 50% for learning, and 67% for resources. Just for context, some of the KPIs that aren't included here will be things like iLearn, because students take those at the end of the year. And similarly, I believe there's a KPI related to the budget for next year by a certain time period. That hasn't happened yet either. The last thing I'll say on that point is, because this is a middle of year comparison to the end of last year, it's not really apples to apples, but it's meant to give you sort of a general sense of where we are overall. Any questions on this page? Okay. So moving on, this table is just highlighting the handful of KPIs that we thought would be of particular interest to you tonight. I'm just going one level deeper. So again, organized by domain area. The first column are the KPIs that we will look at individually in our annual report. And then on the right are the KPIs that we'll be talking about this evening. They're largely the same with a couple of exceptions. One, we won't have staff retention for the following year for obvious reasons. And then we'll be talking about iReady right now instead of iLearn. And I'll, okay, sorry. And then, okay, here's the first KPI here. It's a combination of student and family leadership, which you'll see is we're looking at whether or not we have developed a student council at each of the zone schools, as well as a PTA at each school. So at the end of last year, we happen to have had 3 of each. And this year, at this point in time, we have a student council at each school and a PTA at 4 of them. And then the green line across the top, which straightforward in this case, is the goal for the year, which is 5 in both cases. I think the team is really excited about progress in starting these groups, and we'll be shifting more of our focus onto the development and increasing participation by students and family members in the different groups and councils. This will be sort of an ongoing program as students and their families progress from one grade to the next and onto their next school. And one other new thing this year is that in addition to a PTA at each school, the zone is also working to create a parent or family advisory committee, which will include a parent or family member from each of the zone schools. Any questions? Okay. So on this page, we're moving into iReady for ELA, and we're looking at specifically the percentage of students who are on or above grade level in ELA. Just again, to reorient to this chart, what you'll see, the dark blue column on the left is the baseline from the end of last year, which was the zone's overall average of students on or above grade level, which was 24%. Moving to the right, the light blue bars are the results for each individual school for the middle of the year test, which is generally hovering around the zone-wide average of 16%, which is the orange line across. And our target for the end of this year is the green line, which is 33%. As part of the temp check, we're looking sort of at 2 things. One is looking at the MOI results from last year, zone-wide, which was 12% compared to this year's 16%. And then second, if each school grows the same amount between middle of year and end of year as it did last year, what we would be looking at is an end of year zone average this year of about 28%, which is a bit short of our target. But this is also relating back to how we've talked about K-12 lift, which is, are our kids learning quickly enough? So more than just a year's material in a year's time, quickly enough to catch up and progress to their a better grade level. And one of the questions that we've been working on or thinking about is what more can we do, or what are the supports we can put in place for that? So if you recall a few meetings ago, Roxana talked about the MTSS pyramid and how we use data like this and the ability to dive much deeper into individual grades, subgroups, and individual students to identify where we need to adjust, change resource allocation, and so forth. So helping our students grow quickly enough to change this grade level assessment is one of the reasons why we've made investments in core instruction through Teaching PD, and tutoring, and other resource supports. Any questions on this part?
One, just to make sure I caught data out loud that's not on the chart. So last year, if I'm thinking correctly, last year our final outcome was 24.
Yes.
Which is what our 33 goal is for this year, right? So if I'm comparing, and then this year our 16 is our actual mid, and last year our actual mid was 12.
Yes.
So last year we went 12 mid-year, 24 end of year. This year we're at 15 and okay, so that's how I'm comparing those apples to apples. Okay.
Yes, and what I perhaps did not articulate well is we looked at the growth last year of each school between middle of the year to end of year. And if we simply continued as we are and added that amount of growth to each of the schools between where they are right now to the end of this school year, that would end up at a zone-wide average of about 28%, which is short of the target of 33. But again, one of the reasons that we look at acceleration and use data to try to focus on the students and the topic areas and so forth that really need that extra help.
Julia, can we talk for just a quick second? Because I think the folks who don't view this in the larger context would say, gosh, you guys already started behind. You've got to catch up. It looks like you've taken a step backwards instead of taking a step forward if you were at a baseline last year and you're down below that. So speak to just a second of this, like maybe what happens historically, right? It's why we were having like balanced calendar discussion because there's so much learning loss. So historically, the scores at the beginning of the year are better. Just give us some historical context on that, just to help folks not take this slide and say, oh man, it looks like you're going the wrong direction.
Sure. Well, I will ask Roxana as our lead teaching and learning executive director to hop in, but just the first thing I'll say just before handing it over to her is just emphasizing that comparing MOY, a test in the middle of the year, especially with an iReady, to the test at the end of the year, is students have a different amount of learning period, so or amount of learning time. But Roxana, you are the expert here, and maybe you could give a bit more context to iReady.
Yes, without having pulled, the past few years, I think back to the point that Julia made in terms of the 12% last year, mid-year. This is a December temperature check, which is halfway through the instruction that's taken place to see what percentage of students are growing, right? And here we're seeing B have actually reached proficiency given kind of that grade level criteria. And so when we look at 12% last year, mid-year, at the same time and place, 16% is not necessarily off. But we would definitely, it lets us, like Julia mentioned, dig in to see if there are particular areas that we can beef up supports, that we want to focus on, that we need to problem solve to see is something not happening here. But we are on track given that historical comparison mid-year to mid-year. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Okay. So on the next page, you'll see the same type of information except for math. So again, we ended last year at 18% of students on or above grade level in math. And then if you look at mid-year this year, the average is about 8%. And our target for the year is 24%. And I will also again say that for context, the middle of the year last year was 12%. So and if we made the same growth this year as last year, we would be at about 20% at the end of the year. But again, I will defer to Roxana on the history of the different tests.
Thank you, Julia. I will just say that the same applies. In this case, we might be given mid-year to mid-year a little bit off in terms of percentage of students proficient. We're also looking at students that are moving outside of the 3 grade levels below, 2 grade levels below. But looking at this proficiency, we're a few points down from last year, whereas in the reading or the ELA data, we're a few points above where we were last year. We have had major literacy focus which is one thing that we'll be talking about a little bit later today. And also it allows us to take a look and dive into particular schools, grade levels, and a particular strategy that we're using to assess math and math skill mastery or proficiency as we go through the year. So we're using some strategies to help us throughout get information on how students are learning well before the next data point in iReady.
I don't want to belabor data, and I know we can get, like 9 gazillion pieces of data together, but I think the other context that I'm always interested in is, how we compare against our peers. Obviously, we have control over these 5 schools, and our goal is to improve, but, comparing against our competition, if you will, or other schools out there, I think can be helpful, because again, I think the uneducated person who's watching this, this could look really negative, but if our goal is 24% and and the state average is 30 or whatever, we're in line. If everybody else is at 80 and we're at 24, it's more alarming and stuff. So I just I more think of that. Again, I don't want to belabor the points on the data, but I just always think of that in context. I know with my own daughter, I used to argue that she's competing with everybody, not just the people at this school, and so that context is helpful sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll jump in here. I think that's a great point, Vice President Ray. I think most people who are not avid viewers of education data might look at this and think that these numbers are extraordinarily low. What I would first remind folks of, the iReady assessment is an interim assessment, right? And what or North Star, so to speak, is going to be the ILEARN. That's the state administered assessment. And what we know is that last year, our average growth across the zone was anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 points higher than South Bend schools, all of the charter schools in St. Joe County, as well as Penn, and I believe Elkhart as well. And we surpassed the state average, which had a growth of, I believe, 1.2% points in ELA and just 0.5 in math. Additionally, none of our schools regressed. All of our schools grew, and that was not the case in the neighboring districts. And so to your point, right, even though the numbers might be low in totality, our low numbers are still better than, other districts' low numbers, as well as the state average, so to speak. So, one might say, okay, well, you ended last year with 18% of kids on or above grade level. Why aren't you shooting to end this year with 50%? Well, that's not quite how that works in terms of how you move students. And it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, not just in the timeline, but in the cohort of students, right? So the 18% of students who ended last year proficient might not be with us this year, right? In fact, we know that in that 18%, it will include 8th grade students, and they would have left Navarre and gone somewhere else. It would have included 5th grade students who, while the vast majority of our 5th graders across our 4 elementary schools will matriculate to Navarre, many of them will not. Some of them will go to some of the other available middle school choices. So so you potentially lose some of that cohort of students who were a part of this 18% proficiency that ended last year. So in many ways, it's not an apples to apples comparison. The purpose of the balanced scorecard and the purpose of us sharing this data this evening is for us to share with the board and with the public, give a sense of ultimately whether or not we are on track, all things equal, right? If we are on track towards what we've decided that end of year goal is, right? So, as Ms. Ross shared in her budget report, right? If we spend X number of dollars that we've budgeted per month, by the end of the year, we should get to this total number. The same thing is here. If we increase the percentage of students that are proficient each month by 3%, then over the course of the year, by the time we get to June, we should end at whatever that magic number is. And so at this point in time, what we can look at this and say is, all right, at Warren, we've essentially matched the percentage of students that are proficient ended last year, right? But at Navarre, we have a long ways to go, right? So it's a gauge. Now, if we were to look at this data and to say, okay, well, we ended last year with 18%, and across the board, we're just at 3%, 1% right now, it's the middle of the year, then the takeaway from that data would be, it is very unlikely that we would be able in the second semester make up enough ground lost in the first semester to meet the to get to that baseline. But based on where we are right now, if we just continue what we are doing now, Wilson and Harrison are likely to exceed last year's baseline. Warren is basically there. And so now we just have to double down a little bit more in terms of our efforts for Coquillart and Navarre. So that's how I want folks to use this data. Does that make sense, Mr. Ray?
It does. Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay. So on this, we're going to shift gears here and move into student attendance. So it's the same type of chart that you saw for iReady, which shows on the left-hand side that we ended last year with an average student attendance of 86%. There's some variation among schools, but on average, we've also met last year's baseline at this point in time and are close to the target of 87%. And some of the things that our teams in the schools are working on as far as attendance are again, using data to make sure that every school knows which students have had consecutive absences so they can follow up with calls and home visits. We think that some of the really positive culture changes in the buildings, our level up theme for the year, are also helping with attendance and making the school environment and community someplace where kids want to come. And we also know that the extracurriculars and athletics programs that we continue to roll out are actually part of an attendance strategy. And being able to have expanded those programs, I think, is also going to contribute to ongoing improvement in attendance rate. That is sort of where we are with attendance. And do you have any questions on this page before I move along? Okay. So the next couple of slides, we're going to be looking at student behavior data, specifically office referrals, in-school suspensions, and out-of-school suspensions. And just a couple of notes before diving in, which is, just to set the stage, is all disciplinary events begin with an office referral. And these are really any behavior issues that were not managed by the teacher in the classroom. So this can include a student who does physically go to the office, as well as when a teacher asks a principal or other administrator to come assist with a difficult behavior in the classroom. And this is a really important part of the MTSS process. And we and the building leaders have been emphasizing the need to really document every form of assistance so that they and their leadership teams can ensure students are getting the interventions they need, and that the school teams can see trends on what is working and what is not working. Now, after a referral, a few things can happen depending on the nature of the incident. Some incidences will be resolved at the referral level. Others will be escalated to an in-school suspension, and others will escalate to an out-of-school suspension. So with that said, on this page, we're looking at the percentage of students who have had an office referral that did not escalate any further. So we ended last year at about 20% of students. And so far this year, the zone is at 10% of students. So you'll see that the orange and green lines have flipped as the zone has improved on our target for the year. And I think, as we know, attendance is important for referrals and other forms of disciplinary measures are really important in terms of student wellness and their ability to self-regulate and contributing to a better learning environment, because students overall experience fewer disruptions to class and therefore have more minutes in instruction. And again, I'll just note that these are the referrals that did not escalate further, so it's not the whole picture of any given school. But any questions here? So on the next page, you'll see students who have the percentage of students with office referrals that escalated to in-school suspensions. Again, our baseline at the end of last year was 6%, which is about where we are this year. You'll see that Navarre is at 0 here. As you'll see on the next page, their referrals tend to escalate more towards out-of-school suspension. All right. Any questions on this page? So lastly, as with the previous pages, these are the percentage of students with referrals that escalated to out-of-school suspensions. You can see that we ended last year at about 25%. This year, we're about at 18%, and our target for the year is 23%. So although middle of the year, end of the year are not exactly comparable, it's overall sort of close. Any questions on discipline? Okay. So shifting gears, we are looking at the funding that we've received from our partners and other organizations. This includes the total dollar value of both grants, in-kind donations, and a small stream of earned income, which is our space rental to other organizations. So last year, our schools and Mr. Yazel, the Director of Partnership Development and Athletics, did an amazing job at raising $460,000. We have rewarded them this year with a higher target of about $613,000. And at this point in the year, we're at about 340, which is exciting in that it's 75% of last year and about halfway towards the goal of this year. Any questions on this point? Then just to wrap up, looking ahead, one thing that we will continue to do is sort of share periodic updates and sort of notable metrics. At the end of the year scorecard, all of the reports will include all of the KPIs, including iLearn, staff retention, and so forth. And then, as we talked about the first time we talked about the balanced scorecard, you'll see different levels of summaries within the domains and so forth. The last thing that I'll mention is that we're creating a sort of board member site where you'll be able to access the scorecard directly, as well as all of the other materials that we share and discuss in a way that's a one-stop shop. And that will be up and running over the next month or so. But that is where we are with just a quick temperature check on this moment in time. And I'll just have one last call for questions on this topic. Okay.
Thank you.
And I will hand it over to Ms. Zapata.
Thank you, Julia, and good evening, board. I would like to get us started with another one of our focus reports for today, which is regarding the science of reading, literacy as the focus, of course, and English language arts curriculum for this year. You can turn that, and hopefully we will be able to, if not, we'll skip it, but hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties with showing a video clip. But before we show the video clip, right before we show the video clip, I would like you to think about, as you watch this brief clip, how you learned to read.
Sound Brown, could you help me with something? Calling my man, I'll do what I can. I'm trying to read this word, but I'm not having much luck. Now listen up, Folly, here's all you need for the down basics of learning to read. You start at the front and you move to the rear. You say each sound out loud and clear. You go, ah, You go, ah, And then you run the sounds together and smooth them out. And that's what reading is all about. You go, ah, yeah. You go, ah, yeah. You go, and you go, and you go, and man, yeah.
So I'm not sure if that brings back any memories for anybody, either as a parent or a student or child. I know it does for me. And I'm not sure if that's the way you learn to read, or if the second example right next to it is more the style or the way, the method in which you or children were taught to read. Looking at the sentence, looking at the word, taking a guess, maybe looking at the first letter of a word when you get stuck, and guessing by taking a look at the picture. And that's another methodology that has been used historically in reading. The question, though, is the dog sleepy once I figure out that that's an S and I look at the picture? Is the dog sick or soft? How many words might come to mind and be adequate guesses given the context before we get to sad? Really, not everybody needs one or another way of reading, and there are some children, some of us just really get it. About a third of us do, but there's been a passionate debate for those that don't, called the reading wars, about which approach is really best to learn to read. What we know is that there's been a lot of attention given lately to what has historically been the case, and that is a lot of research and a lot of robust evidence pointing to the positive impact on reading of what is called explicit and systematic instruction of phonics. Something like the video teacher. Not quite, but Sesame Street might have gotten it right. If we could go to the next slide.
Same Sound Brown, could you help me with something?
So really, even if they did get it right, there is evidence to show that this piece of really sounding out, identifying sounds, sounding out letters, how they work together, is an important part of this explicit systematic phonics instruction that many kids need. But it's only one part or one piece of the science of reading puzzle. Being explicit about sounds, how they connect to the letter, how they work together matters. And other parts of the puzzle are important because we can know that sad is sad, but that doesn't necessarily help us with the meaning of sad. We can go to the next. Here's a simplified view of the science of reading. There's some graphics that really do a great job of capturing visually the complexity of all of the pieces in that rope of reading. But the simplified view gives us a good picture, and that is that there are pieces related to decoding and unlocking what that code is, of how words work, how sounds work, and how letters and sounds work together in words. And then there's this component of understanding language, understanding what is meant, what words mean, and how to reason verbally. And it's both of those pieces together. The research has shown over and over, and the evidence strongly lets us know that both of those lead us to reading comprehension, which understanding what we read is the goal for learning, obviously. If you could go to the next slide. So as we think about the science of reading, we also want to set this context of where we are. We are a transformation zone. What we do is innovate. We have the opportunity to do that. We can look at evidence, we can make changes and make decisions that are informed by that evidence. And as I mentioned, the evidence strongly supports the science of reading, all of those pieces to the puzzle, and our adoption of EL education as the ELA curriculum for elementary school is a part of that. The freedom to innovate really means that we are able to strategically address things in creative ways, non-traditional ways, and also address other barriers along the way. So we innovated in how we engaged our teachers. Actually, if you recall last year in the spring, I shared our curriculum review process where teachers really led the work, and they reviewed curricular materials, they tested them out, delivering in classrooms different lessons, they evaluated the different curriculum options against criteria and met to collaborate in that work with different high quality instructional materials. And they landed on the EL education curriculum, which really, again, allows us to look at not only the curricular choice, but also address something that's very important for us. And that's our focus on teacher retention, empowering staff. We facilitated collaboration in the process and also fostering teacher agency and their own teacher self-efficacy. So the process for reviewing and adopting the new ELA curriculum had science of reading front and center, but was also designed to involve our teachers in that process. And preliminary themes of our stay interviews are showing that self-efficacy and agency are definitely important to our staff. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to just briefly capture a few things with EL education and the curriculum. Of course, our students are assessed at the end of the year, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier by Dr. Lewis that iLearn is an assessment that at the end, we will be, at the end of the school year, we'll be able to take a look at students' proficiency on grade level standards. In this case, English language arts standards. We also have iRead 3, which is another state assessment for third graders. And we've been using it since last year for second graders so that we have an early look at how they're doing. But iRead 3 is assessing on the basic foundational reading skills aligned to parts of the science of reading, both the decoding pieces as well as the comprehension pieces. With EL education, we really wanted to make sure that our curricular materials aligned with what students need to know and be able to do related to the ELA standards in Indiana. Aligned to the science of reading, we want to be teaching kids the skills to think critically, even before they're able to actually unlock the code and engage in that decoding successfully, or as they're doing it as well. EL education looks at the whole child. It doesn't treat learning and development of children in separate ways, and that aligns a lot with our holistic approach, our mission, our vision in the zone, and culturally relevant, not only rich and complex texts that deeply engage our students are an anchor for the curriculum. The last piece here, and we're going to take a closer look, is habits of character and how something like this infused intentionally in the curriculum can foster student agency. If we could go to the next slide just to take a look at some examples. So these are, if you take a minute to look, these are all powerful and they tie to student self-efficacy. They're woven into the curriculum and how it's delivered in many ways. If you look at the fourth bullet, for example, I show compassion. I notice when people are sad or upset and reach out to help them. you can see this, this connection to compassion and empathy, and dispositions and habits that we want our students to embrace. If we go to the next slide. Okay, and before we're gonna, I know, see that video in just a minute, but before we do, I know that as board members, not only here, but you've certainly seen many presentations of programs. What we know is that nothing can be impactful for student achievement without implementation, and that through line is something that we're really laser focused on, both progress monitoring and accountability, so that there is implementation of the curriculum as it's intended, right, to get to the results that we want to get to. Not unlike this balanced scorecard, which we just had Ms. Tao go over, where we can see there's this monitoring and accountability tool that allows us to look at progress. We need to do the same for our curriculum. So as we think about what the zone is implementing next and taking where the next level of implementation is for EL education and the curriculum, there's this infused connection to something called CREW. It's really connecting back to the community and cultural responsiveness. It's in the curriculum, infused in the curriculum, as well as beyond the curriculum, creating a culture of belonging for students and among students, and really connecting to those habits of character, such as compassion and empathy. And here's a video that captures just a little bit of that.
Right here, it looks like you have to erase your lines. So like we got erasers so we can make it perfect, and we got to ask our crewmates if they could help us. Okay, yeah, sure. Because if they helped me, that would be showing compassion.
And this is just a little clip, but we care about our kids and the community, and infusing and ensuring that compassion and empathy among peers and in our schools is obviously critical to the work we're doing. It's aligned to our vision and mission to be student-centered, and it places a spotlight on student voice, on choice, and the curriculum itself. EL education is not about rote memorization, but really shifts the learning much deeper. We're also focused on empowering staff and teacher retention and self-efficacy and collaboration, and none of that is living in a silo. It really all comes together. Everything is connected so that our curriculum switches are more than a curriculum piece in isolation. Instead, it feeds this connected and coherent system that we are refining. Julia, if you could take it to the next.
Here, it looks like you have to erase your lines. So like we got erasers so we can make it perfect.
Just briefly, I want us to just take a look at our KPIs as was mentioned and connected in the balanced scorecard presentation or focus report. We have our zone improvement plan goals. And in those goals, one, for example, is relating to instructional practices that teachers demonstrate in the classroom and behaviors that really promote and foster student ownership of academic achievement. You can see that some things are directly connected in terms of KPIs connected to that goal. Some things are indirectly connected, such as how many students are on a student council at each of our schools. And then there are some that don't have a connection to that particular goal. What is important, though, is that EL education is a core driver and a strategy to work on this goal from the zone's standpoint. And before I hand it off, and then we come back for some questions, but we can stop for questions if necessary before the handoff. I know that we've just looked, like I mentioned, at the balanced scorecard, and we can connect those KPIs. But here, when we look at implementation, that's how those KPIs are actually going to translate, right? We need that implementation to be strong, as we discussed. So a few of the very intentional ways that we're doing that in a cohesive system is looking at instruction in the classroom and EL education for ELA learning and reading in the classroom, as well as looking at intervention and how, in addition to what students get, every student gets in the classroom, what might be needed and who might need more intense support. And that happens in a tiered way, like we discussed with MTSS a few months ago. Progress monitoring, we're continuously getting, especially for students that are showing that they need more supports, we're getting data that lets us know, are they on track? Are they growing? And if not, we can make adjustments and problem solve. And then what supports are given for implementation in the system, in addition to the data and to instruction and intervention resources. And that's coaching, our early release Thursdays, and the professional learning that happens at our schools, professional learning committees where teachers get together and are able to discuss as well as internalize what standards students need to know, how they're going to get them there, and then learning walks, which we are taking a few this year with EL Education's team so that principals can take a look at how to lead instructional change and the implementation in their schools. With that, I would love to, if possible, hand off and come back for questions, unless there's some burning questions. I'd like to hand it off to what implementation looks like at the school, and I'm very excited to hand it off to the Coquillard leadership team, who are going to discuss the school's implementation of ELA instruction in the science of reading.
Okay, thank you, Roxana. Good evening, board, Dr. Lewis, any guests. With me, I have Miss Sarah Rodriguez. She is our principal intern at Coquillard and has been instrumental in everything that we've been doing. So she's here in the meeting, as well as Miss Patience Trowbridge. She's kindergarten teacher and happens to be Coquillard's Teacher of the Year this year as well. So they'll help kind of as I walk us through this. Okay, so a quick overview here. As we were pursuing improving literacy at Coquillard, we were really intentional about how we wanted to bring the science of reading into our classrooms, not just throwing the spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks, but instead leaning into what science tells us about how students learn to read. So we're using this, as Roxana said, in Tier 1 core instruction, as well as intervention and across different tiers. It's integrated with the MTSS framework, making sure that we're using curriculum that's aligned across the tiers of instruction so that students are getting a cohesive message. And it also ensures that students are hearing the same language, right, over and over again, that if my keyword for a letter is apple, my keyword is apple, no matter which teacher I'm working with at that time. Another way that we tried to be really intentional was with the master schedule. So in our master schedule, there's a block of time that's dedicated to foundational reading in lower school and language comprehension in upper school, and then a whole other separate time across grade levels where they're really working on comprehension and writing and that critical thinking piece. In addition to that, we know that our kids have some gaps, right, where we really need to start to fill some of those things in. And so there is a win time, which is what I need, where we're really looking at what do individual students need, looking at data from some different assessments that we're using to make sure that we're helping fill in those gaps. We are doing progress monitoring, using DIBELS, iReady, phonics and phonemic awareness screeners. So we're monitoring student progress and then making minor adjustments to instruction. So we have some students who might be moving in and out of intervention, depending on how they're doing with some of the discrete skills. And then, you know, thinking about things like, well, maybe this child specifically needs to focus on fluency, so they'll practice with readers theater or something like that. And then thinking about coaching and how we're going to support teachers, we are really fortunate. We do have a literacy coach through the cadre. as well as Mrs. Rodriguez in-house. And so both of them are able to do some professional development for our teachers and a lot of coaching. It's also something that our assistant principal, Mrs. Clayton, is really passionate about, and something that I'm passionate about. And so we've spent just a lot of time working with staff around this idea. Mrs. Rodriguez has been instrumental since the beginning. She's been leading MTSS because of her deep knowledge about what science says students need, and her excellence in just overseeing systems and kind of following through, making sure that we always have intervention happening and that things just keep moving along. And then together as a staff, we've been talking a lot about invested families. So having literacy events, increasing communication, problem solving with families about how we can make a difference, and transparency about how students are currently performing. So making sure that grades are truly reflecting a student's ability to meet grade level standards. Like we talked about earlier with the data, we have so many students who aren't at or above grade level. However, they may have gone home with grades like A's and B's because they're really great kids and they try really hard. And that sends a mixed message to our families. And so we're trying to be really transparent with families and partner with them so that they know exactly how students are performing. Okay. Sarah.
Good afternoon. Hi. So I'm just going to go through the implementation timeline for some of the things that we've been doing at Coquillard around the science of reading. So in the fall of 22, when we first started departmentalizing, I was teaching second grade, and I realized that there was when I inherited the class that we departmentalized with, I realized there was a large group of students whose needs were not getting met by the curriculum that we were using at the time. They just needed something a little bit more explicit, something a little more systematic. So I started looking into it, and that's when I started piloting UFly, which is an evidence-based science of reading curricular tool. And since it's been endorsed by the IDOE, which brings us to the spring of 2023, a lot of the other teachers were kind of noticing that students who maybe weren't engaged in foundational reading before were showing growth and just enjoying reading. And so they were asking, like about UFly. And so I gave a professional development with just a quick overview of what UFly is. And then Laura will talk you through the spring and summer of 23.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us to when the Curriculum Adoption Committee recommended and SBEZ decided to adopt the EL education curriculum. After looking at those curricular recommendations and considering what the science says, we made those structural changes that I talked about to the master schedule and really solidified our reading intervention plan. And then in the fall, when our teachers were able to really dive into the curriculum and it all been delivered to school and they were having some professional development, they shared some concerns with me and with our leadership team, just saying that, this is a lot. It's a lot to kind of figure out and to take on. And they asked if they would be able to go ahead and use UFly, not in place of EL, but instead to augment what EL already offers. And so we're really thankful. We took that proposal to Dr. Lewis, and he was responsive to their concerns. And we were able to, in partnership with teachers, decide to go ahead and craft an implementation plan that would support our teachers and ultimately students as the teachers learn some of the different strategies and different science of reading, things that they need to learn to be able to really teach those foundational reading skills.
So that brings us to the middle of the year now. We're continuing to look into the data, and we're analyzing the middle of the year student data and progress monitoring. And also, like was mentioned earlier, where it's really important to not only look at the student outcomes, but also, you know, how it's being implemented. And so that's something we're continuing to monitor and support as well. And then we are also, we're moving forward, we're going to be looking more at how we can partner with families, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Reading as a Game Changer family event that's coming up. But yeah, we want to continue to build those partnerships. And looking forward to the end of the year, we are making progress towards the school improvement goal of 56% of students measuring on or above grade level in the phonics domain. So yeah, and then also joining us is the Teacher of the Year, Patience Trowbridge, and she's going to talk a little about her experience as a kindergarten classroom teacher, implementing the science of reading aligned practices in her classroom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patience, and I am the kindergarten teacher at Coquillard. So with my experience with the science of reading and the students' experience from using the new tools that we started with this year, I feel like it's been a great experience. Comparing my students from last year to this year at just the middle of year, I see my students have more confidence, more growth, even ending in the year. I have kids reading sentences. Being an early childhood educator, I started my career learning about the science of reading and how to meet children where they are. So this year, having students reading passages, sounding out words they have never seen before, and making that connections with the books in EL to the text, it's really great to see. The small group time that we have built into our schedule this year really helps me work one-on-one with individual needs for each child. They're developing skills that they're getting one-on-one with that win time. So assessing children after like an assessment or a test, and then working with them to correct what they didn't understand during that win time has been really helpful in our master schedule this year. And then with the changing instructional practices, EL really helped dive into that comprehension piece and the repetition, where UFly is really working on those skills needed to learn those foundational reading skills. I love UFly right now. I find it's really easy to use. It's really really routine oriented, which my kindergartners need. It's been helpful understanding brain development and how important it is to teach and expose children to best practices to give them what they need to be successful readers. And I find that the program, the science reading modules from the state of Indiana has really been helping me learn more about that and be more intentional with my practice in my classroom. And from the support from coaching and PLCs, I feel like our literacy coach, Ansley Grant, really helped me get to a positive place, being able to implement the new changes this year. She finds resources that tie in with our UFly lessons and is a great resource in our PLCs. I feel like us at Coquillard have a really collaborative team that asks good questions that leads to great problem solving. And I also believe that having the same leadership with the great addition of Mrs. Clayton, our vice principal, we started the year off stronger, and we're able to really deep dive into helping catch up where we need to be in the classroom. And I believe that our expertise working together is really helping our grade level teams fine tune our skills and working together with our leadership team.
Thank you, Patience. And then, yeah, thanks. So we're learning a lot, constantly learning, constantly growing, constantly thinking of what we can do better, different to meet the needs of students. We've found some major things that have made a big difference. One of those things being, like Patience mentioned, the continuity of leadership. So the leadership team, Kendra and Laura, are both very passionate about the science of reading. We all met and constantly talk about, the newest things that are coming out around the science of reading, whether it's listening to the Sold a Story podcast or, just something we're all really into. And then just having the same people in the building has allowed, in my opinion, it's helped with the teachers trusting, both Kendra and Laura are familiar faces. So I think that helps with teacher buy-in when people they already know and trust are saying, what kind of practices are going to be most effective for students, then that trust is already there. Also, having continuity amongst the staff and teachers, it's really helpful, and it's been really cool to see teachers kind of norming around common language in regards to the science of reading. You hear them talking about continuous blending, and a year or two ago that was just something that you didn't hear, and it just seems like everybody's got this fire lit under them, and it's just really neat to see that passion growing and continuing to grow over, as we've retained people over the last year.
A couple other things that we have found to be really effective is the master schedule structure. So making sure that we're just building in time to ensure that all components have a space during the learning day. And then that responsiveness to teacher voice. So we know that our teachers desire professional development, not always curriculum specific, but deepening their knowledge on what science says about reading instruction, and really helping them to make sure that they can be experts about really great instruction, no matter what curriculum's in front of them or what situation they're in. And then just that teacher voice. And there was, when I shared with staff that we were being responsive to their concerns about implementation, there was like a visible relief, and so I think being able to offer that to them and them having that self-efficacy and that team mentality around we're doing this thing together and we're all moving in the same direction has made a huge difference in staff culture, as well as being able to move the needle with reading instruction.
And then also with family engagement, this is where we really want to focus our efforts moving forward. We met over break with, in preparation for this Reading as a Game Changer event that's coming up. We met with families we're trying to put together a leadership team of families who are going to really rally around literacy, not only with their students, but in the community as well. And we actually screened the Right to Read film, which I highly recommend watching if you haven't seen it. It's really powerful, and we invited families in, and we wanted to hear what they needed from us to be more effective in meeting the needs of their students. And our students. And we also, in that meeting over winter break, we heard families and students even who came with their families, but the parents were saying that they wanted more transparency is a big thing, and we kind of anticipated that. The one mother said she doesn't want, to feel good. She wants to know if her students are struggling so that she can do something about it. So yeah, we've got this Reading as a Game Changer event. It's supposed to be tomorrow, but we postponed it because of the weather. But at this event, we'll be viewing clips from the Right to Read film and discussing it with families. We really want to promote a culture that celebrates literacy and just working together as partners with families. We also partnered with Notre Dame, who is going to be bringing some of the basketball players from the men's basketball team to just kind of do a read aloud, promote literacy, and also talk about the importance of literacy no matter what path you choose to follow in life. even if you want to be an athlete or whatever, like in anything you do, reading is super important. And also we're going to, at this event, give families an overview of where students are at, and then give them resources to intervene at home, and just little things that families can do to further support students. Newsletters are going home from classrooms from intervention teachers, introducing themselves to families and just letting them know, if a student's in intervention, just making them aware of that. And then, we just really want to continue to uplift student and family voices so that we can give them what they need to best partner with us. And I do want to thank Ms. Regina Williams-Preston in being a huge advocate for the cause and really being a big support, pushing this forward.
Thank you, Sarah. If possible, and we'll see how this works, thank you to the Coquillard team. As Sarah has just delineated a few really great things that they're doing with the focus on engaging families and the upcoming event, which we're really excited about. I want to go back to, although we're not going to go back to it physically, but these layers for implementation, and how on the side, invested families, which is one of the components in our school effectiveness framework, is really key. And how do we, knowing that systems are needed, but that parents, families are the first teachers of students, and engaging them authentically in the work to really be partners in learning, not just connecting, but specifically in learning and in the goals and the mission for their students to learn. I think we're still working on that. We continue to work on that, and would love to have an opportunity, even if it's a brief one, to present this question to the board to see if you have some ideas and can partner with us in problem solving. How do we create these invested families, in addition to and kind of springboarding from what Sarah mentioned, Coquillard is doing specifically. But the broader question, how do we create invested families as partners? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Maybe specific to your question, but thinking about the role of the board and our potential partners that might be even more helpful in it, would be engaging local, like nonprofits, community centers, community-based organizations that are maybe have experience locally working with families that have engaged them in different ways. And so, thinking Coquillard, they're close with like the Beacon, and thinking about what suggests things they're seeing that have worked, things they've tried that didn't work. That might be my suggestion more than I think a round robin with the board on that. And, obviously my history working with La Casa de Amistad, who used to, who does that kind of work. And I used to work there. So that's where I would probably think of maybe creating some focus groups or something that, Ryan and team could pull together from that community engagement standpoint to say, how do we help, the whole parents as teachers philosophy is something that I think partner organizations would love to help with.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if there's any other thoughts, but if not, I know this was a long presentation in terms of what we talked about from the zone level, and then Coquillard and their capturing of what implementation looks like of the science of reading at the school level. Any questions that any board member might have?
For me, I always ask the standard things with any new initiative. I always say, what was the hardest part about implementing this that you didn't expect? And I always like to then pair that with something that went easy or well faster than you thought it would, that you thought was going to be hard work.
And I would just like to say really just thank you to Laura and the team. I think I go into the buildings for the purpose, for both to visit and for my day job, Boys and Girls Club. And it is a noticeable difference, the efforts that you all have implemented. I don't always see the in classroom thing, so it's really nice for me to see this, but I just see how the culture has changed and just kind of the team working together. It's very obvious. So I just wanted to just publicly give that shout out.
Thank you. I think as far as like what's been just hard, right, is sometimes shifting mindsets. As a reading specialist myself and having been in education for a while, this is not how we started, right? So if you were teaching in the 90s or early 2000s, it was very much the balanced literacy approach. And, you know, just over the weekend, I threw away like my guided reading manuals, and there was like emotional attachment to that, right? So you have to overcome all of these practices that if you have experience in this and you've been doing this a while, you have to unlearn, right? What you've been doing all along. And I think it kind of ties with what's been easy, and what's been easy, and it's a credit to our school and like our teachers and our staff, is doing this thing together. Mm-hmm. It's been a privilege to work with so many people who are all in. I mean, we've screened the right to read, and they brought food, and we had great conversations, and, you know, just everybody's all in on the efforts. And I think that's what really makes a difference. And it speaks to that culture shift, I think, that you're mentioning. So.
I had a few questions that I wrote down during both Roxana's presentation, but also the co-curricular staff's presentation. I guess questions and or comments. So I appreciated the video, broke up the monotony a little bit of this long meeting. And I was definitely an Avis Sesame Street watcher. But I heard you say the way that it was taught then, as far as sounding out words and learning to read, was wrong, or was questioning if maybe that was wrong. And I was wondering if spelling, reading, and vocabulary are not still three different things that are being taught. Again, I'm not a teacher and I'm not in classrooms, and my kids are in their 20s now. So I knew back then what was going on. Now I don't know what's going on. I work mainly with students preparing them for college. So I don't know like the ins and outs of the younger students, but even the older students, because again, I'm not in the classrooms like that. And so things have definitely changed a lot. And so the science of reading is definitely something different. But my question is, do some of those things still play a role in the classroom? So some of those things that they taught in sounding out, vocabulary, spelling and spelling tests, do some of those still play out in teaching our kids reading comprehension, and learning what those words mean?
100%. And so thank you for the question. And I'm going to in a moment hand it over to Laura to see if she would like to add anything. What I would like to say is that video clip, although not a teacher, right? And there's pedagogy and instruction and all of those things. The idea of explicitly laying out what this letter does in terms of sounds, how those sounds work together, how those sounds get manipulated and blended, and how they connect to make a word, is very much captured in the evidence and the science of reading. And so Sesame Street, in a way, got it right? It is that systematic, very intentional, sequential, explicit instruction so that kids don't have to guess how words work or absorb it through osmosis, although some might do that. The other side, which evidence doesn't necessarily hold as something that is impactful in teaching reading, is that the guessing, right? The where the dog picture was, the image of the dog, and then you're told to look at the letters and guess what they are, and then guess what the word is by looking at the first letter, looking at the picture. That hasn't necessarily held the same in terms of evidence, although there is a passionate group that believes in that. The evidence shows exactly what you mentioned. And yes, spelling, writing, vocabulary, reading, I think the science of reading just provides us with like a conceptual organizational structure that things fall in a couple of buckets, and explicit instruction really matters. I'm going to just say that, and I'm sure I've missed a few things. So Laura, I don't know if you'd like to add anything.
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest difference for me is this idea of memorization, right? Like remembering what a whole word looks like. Think about like memorizing words with flashcards. We found out that's actually the opposite of what we want. It can make it harder for kids to learn how to read. It uses a different part of their brain than the part of their brain that takes chunks of words, like this picture, connects it with what this sound is, and then puts it together into a whole word. And so thinking about things like that, we want to instead teach the different letters, teach different letter patterns, and then instead of maybe giving a list of words to memorize for spelling, giving a spelling pattern so that students can spell any words with that spelling pattern. And so a spelling list shouldn't be random words they're just memorizing, but instead it might be words that they're practicing building words that have specific letter patterns that they have explicitly learned in class. Otherwise, we're definitely teaching vocabulary. All of those different pieces are still there. It's these nuanced shifts and largely getting away from memorization.
Thank you. Another, and I don't want to dominate, but I did have a few things because Roxana said we would wait until after everybody finished before we asked. So you mentioned something called a learning walk, and that was something that would be done with principals. Can you explain what that is? And is that something that maybe the board could see?
Oh, that's a great question. So learning walks actually were, there are 3 points in the year that over the summer we had mapped out so that the principals could get together with somebody, an expert in EL education curriculum and implementation, and walk through classrooms with different tools and lenses of what implementation should look like, and then have debrief conversations as to what we're seeing in the classrooms, not at all for evaluative purposes, but instead to look at trends and patterns in buildings and across buildings, and principals as their own professional learning community could really talk about and think about what the data is showing, what those trends are, and how and what to focus on in terms of building capacity and the supports necessary for the next step of implementation. So we had the first learning walk series. We went to all 4 schools with the 4 elementary principals and myself at the beginning of the year, after about 4 weeks of having really implemented, rolled out the curriculum. The principals were able to, with the facilitator guiding them through the process, identify which tool or which aspect they were going to be looking at. And we went into classrooms in every school, and then we're able to kind of get an idea of what again were the trends per school and then across schools to then action step at their own individual buildings. They've continued to look at implementation, and then another learning walk was actually scheduled for today and tomorrow, which was changed given the weather and the closing of schools. That will be rescheduled. So that's the mid-year, midpoint, and then an end of year learning walk. So I would be more than happy to communicate further with you all to see if some of you would like to join.
Thank you. And then my final question, I think, and I want to make sure I heard this correctly. I think Laura was presenting when she says students go home with A's and B's because they are really good kids. And she was talking about full transparency. Can you explain better what you meant about that? Is that what is really happening? But the kids are not doing well in the class, but they're really good kids, so they're getting these grades?
I think, when we consider completion grades and like, did I do my homework or not do my homework and things like that, there have been times, and I'm sure not just in the empowerment zone, right? everywhere where a student will come up to me and they're like, look, I got all A's and B's. And because I love looking at student data, I like give me a name and I can pretty much tell you where somebody is performing, right? And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. How are we a school that is in the empowerment zone because we have so many students not proficient, and yet all of the kids are coming up and showing me their A's and B's? That doesn't make sense to me. You know, in some places there are like grades have changed instead to looking at student proficiency at each standard or in clusters of standards, so that instead you're showing like, oh, they're able to meet this standard or not meet this standard. But in a grading way where you have A's, B's, C's, there's all of these subcategories. And so if I always turn in my homework, I sit in class, I complete the work, but I completed the work with all of this help, I can't do it on my own yet. I shouldn't have an A in that class because I can't do it on my own yet. And so it doesn't mean that they're not amazing kids. It doesn't mean that they don't have a ton of potential. And it doesn't mean that they're unable to learn anything. It only means they haven't mastered the standard yet. And so that's what we want to make sure we are communicating to our families, whether or not their children are able to meet the standards yet, what they do need, how we can help, and how we can help support and come together with families to make sure that they are getting what they need. Does that help?
Kinda. Sounds like A's and B's don't mean what they used to mean. They mean something different now. Again, I mean, I'm talking about from like years and years ago. But because we have some who are parents and who were in school, like when I was saying when my kids were in school, and technically that's what those letter grades meant. I think we need to make sure, like you said, that we educate the parents, or we come up with a different system so that when a parent sees an A, it actually means an A, or if an A means something different now, we explain that to them so that they know. And the kids too, because the kids need to know too. Because while we're saying you get it, you know, you have an A and a B, they think I'm doing good in the class. And so I think that, like you said, full transparency, especially in this area, is definitely needed, because I'm pretty sure if my kid came home with an A and a B, I'm thinking that they're doing well in their class. They're doing good in that subject.
Yeah. I just want to add and echo complete agreement, but also add how that student piece that you just mentioned is so essential, and definitely something that we have shifted focus to get to student self-efficacy and students that are really the drivers in their learning. They need to know where they are, right? And so that's definitely something that has progressively become more and more infused in the work that we're doing, that they know where they are, they're able to set goals, and then they can see how their effort translates to movement.
I would just add, Miss Watkins, it is not uncommon. So last year, when I got here and started having town hall meetings with families about the reset, and I shared with families that only 2% of students in the entire zone were proficient in math, and only 6% in ELA. So that was the equivalent to 46 students and 138 students out of 2,300 students. And so many parents were like, well, what are you talking about? My child's on the honor roll. As you work with high school students, getting them ready for college, just think in your own experience, how many students who come to you who are preparing to go to college, but that first semester they're doing remedial courses. Or as you're going through the FAFSA application with them, or they don't even know how to write a personal statement, things like that. Historically, we just pass students along, which is a part of the reason that we implemented last year the promotion in doubt process, to kind of break this cycle of just passing students along who are not prepared for the next grade. The other thing I would say is it's sometimes, and I just had this conversation with the co-quiller team, sometimes classroom instruction does not match the rigor in terms of what students will see on an assessment, right? And so the classwork that students might be getting might be at a level that is significantly lower than what they will see on an assessment. So a student could get all A's, but then they take an iReady assessment that is going to be more challenging, or iLearn or iRead 3, which will be more challenging, will be a lot more standards-driven, standards-based, and they're not prepared, right? And so if I, for the whole year, have been practicing to do 10 push-ups, and now at the end of the year, the test is to do 100 push-ups, yeah, I can do 10 push-ups, but I can't do the other 90. And so that's essentially what happens. So that's something that happens at the classroom level. And so these kind of learning walks, working with teachers around lesson planning, PLCs, weekly PDs on Thursdays, all of these things are things we've implemented in the last year and a half as a way to combat a number of different things. So it's the rigor of instruction, the quality of instruction, it's the materials, it's the textbooks, it's parents. I can go on and on in terms of the variables and the inputs that you have to address to try to move the needle. So going back to the earlier slides around the balanced scorecard, yeah, the goal this year is 33%. But that's 33% considering where we were last year, considering where we were the year before, where we are the year before. And that's why when folks say, oh, we can go from 33% to 70% in 1 year, that's not going to happen, right? So as I keep saying, this is a long game. It's a marathon, and so you kind of have to slowly chip away at all of these things. And so because there are all these things that you need to tackle simultaneously, so as to not overwhelm people, you have to kind of pick and choose what you tackle when. And so the Coca-Cola team and I were just having a conversation around, we've identified some things that teachers need to address, but if we were to throw all 4 of these things at teachers, all of them would walk out. So we had a very kind of difficult conversation, like which of these 4 things, all 4 are important, but if we had to pick one, which is what teachers have the capacity to do, given that new curriculum and all these other things that they're grappling with, if we had to pick one, what's that one thing that we think is going to be the highest leverage things? So again, it's a long game, but the things that you're naming, I love the questions and the comments, by the way, and I'm happy to stay on past 8 with you if you have more questions and comments.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I will reiterate, not sending kids home with A's and B's if they're actually doing C's and D's worth of work, I guess, is my thing. Just for the kids and for the parents. And I understand that historically, this has been what has happened, and kids have gotten passed along. And you are right that I see students who cannot write a personal statement in high school when it comes time for college, and they are taking remedial courses, which is also why I'm saying, like, we can't have them having these false grades and continuing to get passed along, and then they get to that point, they're like, well, I was doing good. So thank you, though. Thank all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Coca-Cola team. Great job. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, so we are at the end of our agenda here, so I'm not going to read the public comment statement again. We'll put it up on the screen here. I will remind people you need to go to that little triangle, square, circle in the bottom right of your screen and go to the question answer part if you would like to put a question in the chat. We are allowing that tonight since we are a virtual only meeting. I'm just going to kill some time here if anybody is working on trying to do that, and mention our board communication part of our agenda next. And there it goes, pops up on screen. So we're alternating meetings between the downtown office and being at a school building. And so luckily today was just a downtown meeting. Next month, we will be out on the far west side at Wilson Elementary School. So we hope you can join us out there on February 20th for our next board meeting. With that, hearing no public comment, I'll ask if there's any additional board member comments before we wrap up. Hearing none, I want to thank Dr. Lewis and all staff that were helpful today in putting together all the reports and information for our meeting today. Julia, thanks for coordinating and working through our tech challenges to get all of us on here and participating. I know this was a quick call to make based on weather challenges that we had today, and thank you for everybody for making that happen. Thanks again to all the staff of the South Bend Empowerment Zone for working hard to meet the needs of our students and families. And with that, I will call us adjourned at 7:55 p.m. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody. Stay warm out there.